the Honorable Speaker, may I read an abridged citation of the presenter, the first presenter of the day is none other than the clerk to the National Assembly, Alhaji Muhammad Sani Omolori. He was born in Okene, Kogi State, North Central Nigeria. After primary and secondary education in Okene, he attended the prestigious Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, between 1979 and 1982, where he obtained a Bachelor of Law degree before proceeding to the Nigerian Law School in Lagos. While in ABU, he served in various leadership positions, including being member of the Students' Parliament, Assistant Secretary, Law Students Union, and Secretary General Students Union Government, Congo Campus, between 1981 and 1982. Prior to his education at the ABU Zaria, Omolori had attended the Katsina College of Arts, Science and Technology between 1977 and 1979, where he was the Secretary General Students Union Government between 1977 and 1978. Mr. Sani Omolori's versatility in legislative matters can be traced to the body of knowledge acquired at different times, as well as the college of cognate experience gained over the years. Among others, he has certificate in legal drafting from the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies in 1991, certificate in legislative drafting from the Royal Institute of Public Administration, London in 1982, and another certificate in drafting from Public Law Center, New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, 2001. Besides acquiring yet another certificate in parliamentary administration in November 2004, he has attended many seminars, workshops, and conferences, notable among which are African Bar Association Conference in 1991, Conference for Clerks of National and State Assemblies, Commonwealth Association of Legislative Councils Annual Conference, Cyprus, International Bar Association Conferences, Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Conferences, and several Inter-Parliamentary Union IPU conferences across the world. Mr. Sani Omolori's essential working career has seen him soar through a varied field of experiences, starting off in the private sector before finally anchoring in the public service, now serving as clerk to the National Assembly. Let's put our hands together for the clerk to the National Assembly as I invite him for his presentation on the topic overview of the National Assembly structure, functions, and interparliamentary relations. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Right Honorable Speaker, the Head House Representative, Speaker Yakubu Togara, distinguished Senators-elect, Honorable Members-elect, top management staffs here present. Let me also recognize the facilitators and resource persons, the lead consultant, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The paper is an overview of National Assembly structures, functions, and interparliamentary relations. In introducing the paper, I want to highlight the fact that it is obvious that the legislative arm of government is highly misunderstood. As a matter of fact, it is safe to even say that the legislative practitioners themselves do not fully understand or appreciate how Parliament works. It is therefore very imperative that new members should be acquainted with the workings of the National Assembly so we can appreciate the opportunities of and collaboration with interparliamentary unions and other parliamentary associations. First of all, to be able to show how it works internally, and then to show how it works in relation to outside organizations, even both at international level. and even at local level. The objective of this paper, therefore, is to address some of these issues in order to acquaint the members with the structure and workings of the National Assembly. And secondly, we also have an opportunity to examine the interparliamentary organizations and the potential benefits of belonging to them. But first of all, let me talk about the structure of the National Assembly. The National Assembly, as you know, is a bicameral legislature which comprises the Senate and the House of Representatives. Because there are 109 senatorial districts and 360 federal constituencies. And the leadership of the National Assembly is broadly divided into two, namely the political leadership and the management team. Now, for the political leadership, which is the first that we should mention, you have at the head of the political leadership the President of the Senate and the Right Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives. They are both assisted by the Deputy Senate President, the Deputy Speaker, party leaders, and party whips. They are all known as presiding and principal officers. Of course, the Senate and House of Reps also have special and standing committees, which are headed by chairmen and vice chairman. Now the bureaucracy of the National Assembly is headed by the clerk to the National Assembly, established under Section 51 of the 1999 Constitution. The clerk of the National Assembly, otherwise known as the Sani, is the Chief Accounting Officer of the National Assembly. And he is assisted by the Deputy Clerk of the National Assembly. And both houses, the Senate and the House, have their clerks, clerk of the Senate and the clerk of the House of Representatives. And then we also have directorates, which is our own equivalent of the ministries, if I must say so. And they are headed by secretaries, who are also equivalent of the permanent secretaries in the federal ministry. Of course, working under the secretaries, their immediate subordinate officers are the directors and the departmental heads. As we speak, there are 67 departments in the National Assembly, spread across directorates and offices. Now, the organizational structure of the management of the National Assembly. This is necessary for me to spell this out in order that we can know areas you need to contact and the structures that exist within the management. In the management of the National Assembly, you have the Office of the Clerk to the National Assembly, as I mentioned, Office of the Deputy Clerk to the National Assembly. There you have the Senate. These are all directorates. You have the House of Representatives. You have the Directorate of Human Resources and Staff Development, Directorate of Finance and Accounts, Directorate of Legal Services, Directorate of Legislative Budget and Planning, Directorate of Procurement, Estate and Works, Directorate of Research and Information, Directorate of Health Services, Directorate of Interparliamentary Relations and Protocol, Directorate of Parliamentary Security and General Duties. There are, however, other government departments that are directly responsible to the Parliament. And the first of them is the National Assembly Service Commission. The National Assembly Service Commission is primarily responsible for the appointments, promotion, and discipline of all staffs in the Federal Legislative Service. And it is headed by the Executive Chairman and 12 commissioners selected from the 6 geographical zones on 2 number per zone. There are also other government departments responsible to Parliament, that is one of which is the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies. It's an organ of the National Assembly established by an Act of Parliament in 2011. And the key objectives of NAILS is to provide capacity building through training, research, analytical and support services for the legislature at all levels of government in Nigeria and the ECOWAS sub-region. In the Nails Amendment Act, which was signed into law in 2017, of course, it changed the name from Nails National Institute of Legislative Studies to National Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, and expanded the scope to include capacity building for political office holders, political parties, and other actors in the democratic space. We also have the Public Complaint Commission, which came into existence on 16 October 1975 by Decree 31, and it has powers to initiate investigation on its own or upon complaint on administrative action by government agencies, public institutions, and companies, whether in the public or private sector or officials. Of course, we also have the Office of the Auditor General for the Federation. It's a separate and independent, but its powers and duties and responsibilities are provided for under Section 85 of the 1999 Constitution. Section 85(2) of the Constitution provides that the public accounts of the Federation and of all offices and courts of the Federation shall be audited and reported on by the Auditor General, and is expected to submit its report to the National Assembly, which is considered by a committee of the House or Senate responsible for public accounts. Broadly speaking, the functions of the National Assembly are lawmaking, oversight, and representation. And these powers are expressed specifically and directly as provided for in the Constitution. Of course, there's the exclusive and concurrently legislative powers, and the powers to make law for the peace, order, and good government of the Federation or the state. It also has powers to make law on any matter on the legislative list in the second schedule as apportioned between the National Assembly and the State House of Assembly. There are some distinct powers of the Senate which needs to be highlighted, which includes confirmation of nomination of ministers for the President, to determine the number of special advisors for the President and governors at the state level, confirm appointments of chairmen and members of established executive bodies, confirm appointments or recommend removal from the office, the Auditor General, by power of the President of the State to appoint a medical panel to investigate declaration that the President or Vice President is capable of holding office, etc. Of course, the Senate also has the power to remove members from the office mentioned in Section 157, subsection 2 of the Constitution, and to also confirm appointments of the Chief Justice and Justice of the Supreme Court on the recommendation of the President by the National Judicial Council, confirms appointment of the President of the Court of Appeal, Chief Judge of the Federal High Court, Grand Qadi of the Sharia Court, and the Court of Appeal of the FCT. It also has the power to approve removal of judicial officers whose appointment it has powers to confirm in the first instance. Now, more importantly is like I said from the beginning, the interparliamentary relations. This is very critical because it opens up us to the world, and it attests to the fact that there is, of course, indeed, the world is now a global village, and there is so much benefits that we derive belonging to these bodies. And I also need to mention from the beginning that some of these bodies, almost on a daily basis, have meetings here and there around the world that we need to continue to be represented. In talking about the interparliamentary relation, I need to say that it's an important part of the modern international affairs in a globalizing world, and it includes parliamentary diplomacy and related activities such as promotion of national interests, participating in dialogue to increase mutual understanding between countries, and promoting best parliamentary practices, assistance, and capacity building activities. It includes exchange and cross-fertilization of ideas and experiences, deepening of knowledge of parliamentary practices and procedures, internationalization of and intervening in some local and national issues. IPOs is participation of parliaments in the activities of interparliamentary organizations. IPOs are global or regional forums that bring together parliamentarians from around the world to discuss global issues, propose solutions, debate events, and disseminate and promote democratic ideals and practices. Now, the first amongst them is the Interparliamentary Union, otherwise called the IPU. The The IPU is the International Organization of Parliaments, Article 1 of the Statutes of the Interparliamentary Union. It was established in 1889. The Union is the focal point for worldwide parliamentary dialogue and works for peace and cooperation amongst people and for the firm establishment of representative democracy. Amongst other things, it fosters contacts and the exchange of experience among parliaments and parliamentarians, and considers questions of international interest and concern, and expresses its views on such issues in order to bring about action by parliament and parliamentarians. And it contributes to the defense and promotion of human rights. We also have the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association called the CPA. It is one of the oldest Commonwealth organizations, founded in 1911. And the CPA links parliamentarians and parliamentary staff from over 180 national, state, provincial and territorial parliaments and legislature across the Commonwealth through its network. Its mission is to promote the advancement of parliamentary democracy. And it does this by organizing Commonwealth parliamentary conferences, seminars, meetings, workshops, and study groups. It also facilitates the exchange of visits between members of the branches of the association and publish materials relevant to the aims and activities of the association, which includes the regular publication of periodicals. Now you have the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association CPA African Region. The CPA African Region is one of the 8 geographical regions which became part of the CPA International in 1948. The others are Asia, Australia, British Ireland, and Mediterranean, Canada, Caribbean, the Americas, and the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southeast Asia. The aims and objectives of the region, of the African region of CPA, are pursued through conferences, inter-regional study group meetings, seminars, sporting and cultural events. We also engage in interparliamentary visits, publications, parliamentary information and reference center communication. Now we have the ACP-EU, that is the African, Caribbean, Pacific, and the EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. The Joint Parliamentary Assembly is one of the organs established under the Lome Convention for the attainment of the ACP-EU objectives. And this mandate is to promote the democratic process through dialogue and consultation, facilitate greater understanding between the peoples of the EU and those of the ACP states, and raise public awareness on developmental issues. It also discusses issues pertaining to development and the ACP-EU partnership, and adopt resolutions and make recommendations to the Council of Ministers with a view to achieving the objectives of the Assembly. We also have the African Parliamentary Union, APU. The APU is an interparliamentary continental organization founded in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire on 13th of February 1976. It has 40 parliaments as its members. It aims to bring together the parliamentary institutions of all the nations of Africa and encourage contacts among African and world parliamentarians, strengthen and promote democracy and peace among member nations. The APU holds its annual conference in order to fulfill its goals and also organizes parliamentary meetings in cooperation with international organizations or institutions. You have the Pan-African Parliament, PAP. This is an organ of the African Union. It's established by the Constitutive Act of the AU, Article 17.1, and the Protocol to the Treaty related to the establishment of PAP, Article 5.1. Membership comprises of 5 MPs reflecting gender, ideology, and parties. Currently, 47 countries have ratified the treaty. The objectives of PAP is to promote democratic principles and institutions, popular participation, and good governance. It plays advisory and legislative role, policy shaping and influence, oversight role, setting an agenda for Africa, establish cooperation with other similar national and international bodies, and promotes peace and security. Now you have the ECOWAS Parliament. The ECOWAS Parliament was established under Article 6 and 13 of the ECOWAS Revised Treaty of 1993. It is a forum for dialogue, consultation, and consensus for representative of the people of West Africa with the aim of promoting integration. The Parliament is empowered to consider issues concerning human rights and fundamental freedoms of citizens, interconnection of energy network and communication links between member states, etc. The Parliament will also be consulted on matters relating to policy in the sub-region, health, educational, and environmental. There are other associations that we also relate with that perform functions within the parliamentary sphere. That is the Conference of Speakers and Presiding Officers of the Commonwealth, CISPOC. This brings together the Speakers and Presiding Officers of the Commonwealth National Parliament to promote knowledge and understanding. You also have what's called the ASGP, that is Association of Secretaries General of Parliament. It's a consultative body for the study of parliamentary law, networking, sharing of information, and cooperation between the services of different parliaments. You have SOCAT, Society of Clerks at the Table, which fosters a mutual interest among clerks in their duties and responsibilities and assists in their professional development. Well, as I noted earlier, the legislature is one of the pillars upon which all democracies stand. In Nigeria, it is safe to say that it is critical through its law-making and oversight functions. I therefore want to enjoin members-elect to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the structure of the National Assembly and the collaborative interparliamentary unions and associations. I do hope that this will help in giving a clear understanding of the works of the Parliament as you embark on the legislative duties in the months and years ahead. Thank you and God bless you all.
Distinguished Senators-elect, honorable members-elect, you have had a very lucid presentation from the clerk to the National Assembly. And I want to, first of all, specifically thank him for this very elaborate presentation. Of course, no one will be able to acquaint us with the overall functions and structure of the National Assembly. Some of us will get to know in the process of our work in the National Assembly, those of us who are very serious, and I can assure you that if you're not too serious, you may not even understand the overall structural functions of the National Assembly in just the 4 years that we're called upon to serve in the next house. Sani, we want to thank you for that wonderful presentation. I will highlight some of the major themes in his presentation and maybe elaborate on some of them, and thereafter we'll call for participation from the floor. Now, first of all, what is central to our effective understanding of our role as parliamentarians is to understand the concept of a limited government. In the representative democracy anywhere in the world, it is called a limited government. It is limited in the sense that all the key players, all the key institutions are limited by law. In the absence of law, you can do nothing. If the parliament does anything by which they cannot draw support from express provision of the Constitution or a written law, that action is deemed ultra vires the powers of the Parliament. And more so, the executive as well. The executive is led by the President. Perhaps is the only elected person when they sit at the Federal Executive Council, apart from maybe the President, the Vice President. All others are appointees of the President exercising his powers. And so the executive is like a one-man or at most two-man business. And it is circumscribed heavily by law in the sense that anything done by the executive in the absence of express legislative authorization is ultra vires the powers of the executive. So if we understand that representative democracy dwells in just the provisions of the law, we can now move to, maybe we'll address the structure of the composition of the National Assembly before we talk about the powers of the National Assembly. You've heard that the leadership is comprised of political leadership, led at the level of the Senate by the Senate President, the House Speaker of the House of Representatives, assisted by Deputy Senate President, Deputy Speaker, and a whole gamut of principal officers, either the majority party or the minority party, I think 10 in all. It's there in the document before us, so we can refresh our memory there. In terms of the management team, obviously the clerk is the head of the management team, assisted by the deputy clerk to the National Assembly. We have heads of different departments of the National Assembly, and then most importantly, for those of us who will do business on the floor, you must acquaint yourself with the powers of the clerk to the Senate and the clerk to the House of Representatives. They do both the chamber's work and the administrative work of running the two different branches of Parliament. You have had also the National Assembly Service Commission, recruit and disciplining basically of National Assembly staff. That is their responsibility. Then we have the intellectual wing of the National Assembly, which is the NILS. It used to be NILS, but we've added democratic studies, so it makes it NILS now. It was established by an act of Parliament in 2011, and it's been one of those prestigious institutions that is offering training, retraining of legislators, parliamentary staff, and for some of us who want to craft bills. Once you get into Parliament, they will come in handy in trying to fine-tune any legislative proposals that we will have that will crystallize into a bill and later law. Once you send it to them, they will fine-tune it and put it in the relevant formats that will be very easy for you to argue it. And sometimes they even come up with brief of arguments for those bills. So we may find NILS very, very useful in the course of our legislative works. Apart from just the training that they give, they analyze bills, they support parliamentarians in their work. And then we have the Public Complaints Commission. Obviously, we know that, so established by a decree, but now it's one of the organs that falls within the realms of the National Assembly. And we have the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, Operation Section 85 of the Constitution. If we are familiar with the provision of the Constitution, the reports are submitted to Parliament, and they're the subject of the work of the parliamentary committees on public accounts, whether it's the Senate Committee on Public Accounts or it's the House Committee on Public Accounts. That is what they do, basically to hold hearings on audit queries of ministries, and it formed one of the canals of oversight of both the executive and the judiciary. Now we go to the real functions of Parliament, and permit me to just highlight or dwell on the very term that he mentioned without elaboration, which is a bicameral legislature. Now, what is termed as a bicameral legislature is that the legislature is divided into two houses. Now, for some of us who are quite familiar with the history of constitution making, especially those of us who may have read the Federalist Papers, since we borrowed our constitution from that of the United States, which is a presidential constitution. It was thought that the parliamentary or the legislative power was so powerful that for it to be meaningfully exercised, it has to be divided into two, so that it can even serve as a check on itself, without any of the arms of government exercising checks on Parliament, but by dividing the house into two, one house is supposed to serve even as a check on the other house. Were it to be the case that we have only one House of Parliament in Nigeria, for instance, hypothetically I'm saying this, where you have the powers to impeach the president, for instance, and you don't need guns to plan your coup. All you need to do is to sit in the hallowed chambers of the Parliament and get the buy-in of 2/3 of the senators, if it were just one house of the Senate, for instance, and then off the president is thrown overboard. Then perhaps somebody from the Senate takes over. So it was thought that for the meaningful exercise of legislative power in a presidential system, the House has to be divided by two. And that is why you have the bicameral legislature. Now, one of the incidences of bicameral legislatures anywhere in the world is that if there is a major in any of the houses that dies, whether it is in Senate or in the House that dies, automatically without further debate, it is dead in the other house. That is it, whether it is a bill, whatever it is. If it's before the Senate and it dies, in some cases there's no need for the House to even exercise its powers on it, because whatever it does is as good as dead. So you'll be overflogging the issue for nothing. And also in the bicameral legislature, for that oversight of each other, or the check to work properly, no house by the design of the Constitution is greater than the other house. This point has to be made so that it will guide our understanding. And as I said, I first came up with the issue of limited government. We're talking about the laws and the Constitution of this land. Anything we cannot find in the Constitution or in the law, like I've said, even if you try to do it, is ultra-vires the powers of whatever agency we're talking about. So in the National Assembly, you may have heard of the chairman of the National Assembly. Now, this appellation, I think, is strange to the Constitution and strange to the laws of the land. That is the truth, whether we like it or not, except through the interactive exercise we'll have later on. Somebody can produce a section of the Constitution or that of any other law that gives us the chairman to the National Assembly. And that is why the House is not subject to the dictation of the Senate in the exercise of its powers. Now, the Constitution is very clear. It says chairman joint session of the National Assembly. It is only when the National Assembly is seated in a joint session that you have the chairman of the National Assembly joint session. So it is very, very important for us to understand this. The House will not take dictation from the Senate, neither does the Senate take dictation from the House. If we pass bills that are incongruous, for instance, a different version of the bill is passed by the Senate from that of the House, it goes to a conference committee comprising of equal number of senators and that of the House. And at the end of the day, when the conference committee has worked on the bill, then the report is adopted and off it goes to the executive. But no House can override the other House. So in terms of powers, we seem to be balanced constitutionally. But if you're looking for prestige, for instance, you may want to belong to a club of 109 legislators as against 360. Even though it is said the more the merrier. I don't know how they get the appellation from. But if I had a choice, I would want to be among an exclusive club of legislators of just 109. And also when they have the powers of confirmation that is not available to the House of Representatives. and you confirm judges, you confirm all the appointees of the executive. Now, in relation to the powers of confirmation, we've had issues with that before. When the law clearly provides that an appointment is subject to the confirmation of the Senate, it is expressly clear that without the confirmation of the Senate, that appointment cannot take effect. Okay. And so we ran into a situation in this country where an appointee was proposed, sent to the Senate. There was a security report, perhaps maybe that was overlooked by the executive in the appointment, that clearly says that the appointee was not suited or suitable for that office. And consequent upon which the Senate rejected or declined confirming that appointee. But in deference to really the entire objectives of laws, the appointee was kept in office as to serve in acting capacity. Now, if you look at our laws very well, no law is crafted with the intention, because when you are interpreting a law, you look at the intention of the framers of that law. No law establishing an agency is created with the aim of having that agency run by someone in acting capacity. That one is supposed to be an aberration. The word acting, the acting is just supposed to be for a period that the real substantive person can be filled, because the law itself does not recognize anybody in acting capacity. The acting capacity is supposed to come in just to fill that void, because they say nature abhors vacuum. So you're supposed to fill that vacuum. In the meantime, when the substantive person has gone, somebody is put there in acting capacity, but no law recognizes someone to act in perpetuity. That is the truth. But unfortunately, the reading has been that we can keep someone in acting capacity even if the person has been rejected by the Senate. So I think it's one of the challenges that must be taken up by the next assembly. Now, the legislature being the first institution of representative government, because it's a body of elected parliamentarians, it's always first in a democracy. And where you hear, for instance, the discussion in Nigeria that Nigeria's president is the most powerful president in the world, it is very, very true. But what is equally true is that anytime they are talking about the excesses of the powers the president has, they are talking about the weakness in the National Assembly and the weakness in the judiciary. Where the institution of the legislature is strong and that of the judiciary is strong, you end up having executive that exercises only the powers guaranteed by law or the Constitution. And if that were to be the case, I can tell you, reference to some president being the most powerful in the world will not arise. These are issues that may confront us, whether we like it or not. And in the course of presentation of my citation, it was said that I presented a bill that was not in this assembly, last assembly, seeking to amend section 143 of the Constitution. Those of us who are familiar with the Constitution will know that that's where you have the provision for impeachment of the president and the vice president. And the reason why Nigeria's president is perhaps the most powerful in the world is because he can almost get away with anything. Because the section 143 cannot truly be operated by parliament. And I've said this over and over and over again. If I were the one who has that kind of powers and authority, and I know that regardless of whatever I do, I cannot be impeached from office, what do you expect from me? It will only take the grace of God for me to keep myself in check. But where in a democracy we don't exercise our powers based on law, virtually everything will lie low. And it's one of the tragedies, rather than triumph, that we have experienced in this country which we must correct. But when all these institutions know that any disobedience to the law will attract very dire consequences, there will be changes in this country. And until we get there, I regret to say that we'll continue to struggle as most fledgling democracies are struggling, because the institutions in support of democracies in those countries are very, very weak. So the challenge is before us to make the parliament very, very strong, so that we can keep all the key players under check, or in check. Then, of course, he dwelt on the functions of a parliamentarian, which involve lawmaking, Section 4 of the Constitution. That one, we should be aware of it. The oversight, briefly talked about it. It's a subject matter that really we cannot cover. Maybe there will be a course. I don't know if it's a topic on that. It's a whole big pot of fish that must be discussed. And the issue of representation, when you bring matters affecting your constituency, and you fight for what we call, you fight to attract the presence, federal government presence in your constituency, that's representation. But in lawmaking, you're free to bring any legislative proposal, of course, with the exception of one, that is no member, either of the Senate or the House, can present a bill on appropriation. That is the exclusive reserve of the executive by virtue of constitutional provision. So, interparliamentary relations, he dwelt quite a lot on that. I will not repeat that for want of time, but we have quite a number of them. And the entire reason is for us to build networks through which we share experience, we learn from the experience of other parliamentarians across the world, and through that, strive for the sustenance of democracy and democratic ideals across our region of ECOWAS, our region of Africa, and indeed across the world. So I don't want to take the entire time talking. Unfortunately, the chairman is chaired by a speaker, and then a speaker, you must speak. So whether you like it or not. But I want to stop here and yield the floor to some of our participants who have indicated interest in raising questions or contributing to the subject matter under discussion. So first of all, I want to recognize Senator Engineer Kabir Abdullahi.
We really thank God at least for sharing our lives and giving us, who gave us success to be here. And of course, I commend the organizers of this, let me call it maybe induction course, which I believe maybe the previous National Assemblies were not have, I don't know. So mine is just a suggestion, Mr. Speaker. Because, for example, now every day we are coming here, maybe we'll be coming here for the next 6 or 1 week. I think it will be good if we can have all the papers that are going to be presented that particular day. So that, for example, now we came this morning, maybe like a morning session now, and some papers were presented because we were given documents yesterday. It's likely maybe just in those documents we can pick them. If we know what is going to be discussed every day, we can even also study them before coming here, so that people could contribute better. Then maybe just come sit down and they'll be reading it. Of course, lucky enough, because the chairman is the speaker and he knows our parliamentary for many years, therefore you could be able to explain. So I think I would suggest, sir, if it's possible, let's have the list of all the papers that are going to be presented from today, maybe so that at least if we have them in the documents, we could go and then study them and come and participate. Thank you very much.
The speaker, I want to ask a few questions and ask make also very brief comments. And these questions I'm bringing up are because lawlessness gives birth to further lawlessness. And further lawlessness will bring in absolute disregard to the Constitution and thereby keeping our Constitution without the powers it possesses. Nigeria is a democratic nation governed by the Constitution, which is the ground norm and other extant laws. First question, does the Parliament ever ask the Parliament? Because it takes oversight on the other two arms of government. Who takes oversight of the Parliament? Assuming it errs. But do they err? When a member of the executive branch either in processes or preparation to constitution or extant laws, and the Parliament takes a resolution and transmits to the chief executive of the executive branch, and the resolution of the Parliament is just kept in abeyance without respect. Is that not lawlessness? And if it is lawlessness, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, what will be a standard prescription that will be taken by the Parliament so that this lawlessness will be properly checked? Because if the head is erring, then the sub-heads will be erring and the entire body will be erring. Thank you very much.
My name is Omolori. Mr. Speaker, my question goes to the presentation of CNA in respect of the parliamentary unions. As a new member elect, I would like to suggest and advise the House to see how they can be able to guide us through the workings of those parliamentary unions so that we can be able to understand more and contribute our votes to our organization. That will guide us more and understanding the working of the parliament that relates to our regions, particularly those in the African unions and the Commonwealth unions, so that we can be able to understand their working, then we can be able to contribute our votes as a nation. Thank you.
It's still in advance, but in the course of even delivery, some papers are changed before presentation. So this will be work in progress, and I'd advise the clerk to note this. That may be reflected, hopefully, in the next exercise, but not this one. We may not be in the position to provide these papers now to participants, but in the future, some of these should be uploaded on the participants' maybe emails, so that they can even study them, read the outlines before they come for the course. And at the end of the day, they'll be able to contribute meaningfully to discussions such as we are having now. So your point is well noted, and thank you for highlighting that. To Senator George Thompson Sekibo, who is of course the writer of some of the books I was referring to, and no wonder you would now read from the kind of questions he poses his rest. Does the Parliament err? Of course it does. Who corrects the Parliament when the Parliament makes a mistake? It's certainly not the executive, but the judiciary. Because the question would be that in the exercise of our powers, we may even pass laws that are unconstitutional. And when that happens, you know that the entire section that deals with laws being inconsistent with the provision of the Constitution are null and void ab initio. And that is the language of the judiciary. So it appears that the only institution of government, by virtue of the vertical and horizontal distribution of powers in government that can check the Parliament effectively, is the institution of the judiciary, because they enjoy the powers to pronounce acts either unconstitutional or to agree with us. So of course we make mistakes, but we should be dealt with by the judiciary. On parliamentary resolutions not been attended to, there's no one-way answer to that, and you know it very well. The resolutions are not laws. And the only requirement that will bind the executive is fidelity to our laws, not resolutions of parliament. Now, there's a lot of arguments surrounding that. Parliamentary resolutions are supposed to have persuasive authority, not binding authority in the case, in the sense of the law. They are persuasive, especially if it is a joint resolution of the two houses. And anybody in the executive who is in receipt of a joint resolution of parliament should know that this is the voice, the express voice of the representative of the people. And by precedence, by practice, they are supposed to take it serious. But unfortunately in Nigeria, that's not the case. But we can't even sue to compel fidelity to resolutions of parliament. You know it very well. But they're supposed to be persuasive, and anyone in position of authority that is in receipt of such resolutions should take them serious, knowing that they emanate from the houses of the people. So that's my response to that. So we'll move on. News for you, in the sense that maybe you may be lucky to participate in one of the interparliamentary unions. The bad news is that you may not. Because not all members will be selected. You know, 360 is quite a humongous body of members. And I hope you get selected into one of the parliamentary unions, because very, very few members serve on those bodies. But I think there's an elaborate literature on that, and if you want to acquaint yourself, then you can consult those literatures. As soon as you are sworn in, you should know what to do in case you're interested in becoming a member of one of those interparliamentary associations bodies. So, but you know, I told you everything. Yes, so, distinguished Senator Ali Ndume.
A very important issue that made me to stand up to make my contribution and see whether it will make sense for us. I have been in this National Assembly the 5th time now, and the institution, National Assembly itself, is drifting to a point where the National Assembly is now privatized and to some extent you can say even personalized. One of which now, you say...
Distinguished Senator Ndume, so I'm sorry to stop you. Maybe you assume that because you are a 5th timer in the National Assembly, everyone here knows you. When we get a place, let's introduce our name and the constituencies. But far more importantly is because the NAS TV is recording. The outside world may not know who is talking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My name is Senator Mohammed Ali Ndume. I'm a senator representing Borno South. As I said, Mr. Speaker, and the chairman of this occasion, at this occasion like this, I think it's very, very important, besides giving us an overview of the functions and the structure of the National Assembly, which was aptly done by the CNA. There is the need for us to continue to go ahead to give procedures, the standing procedure of the operations and the limits of the presiding officers, for example. That will now make us, as we say, more of one among equals. But now, from inauguration day, once we go down there and elect one of us as the presiding officer, then he takes over the National Assembly. Example of this is what you rightly said now, that the Speaker, at his discretion, will elect or nominate his colleague, not minding whether that individual is qualified or is even interested in being on that committee. We have the selection committee. The selection committee, for example, as its function should be strengthened so that when we do the constitutional adoption of zoning the committees into 6 geopolitical zones, the zone should be responsible for now appointing or nominating various individuals based on their capabilities, interests into the various committees. In summary, what I'm trying to put forward is that we don't have something to hold on to that will serve as a definite rule. If you look at our standing order, in all of it, it concludes by saying that the presiding officer interprets. So, as if it's written in Yoruba or in Igbo language. Its English is defined there, but when you stand up, you say you have a point of order, and you read the order, and then you say, I rule you out of order. I think there is a need for us to look at this critically.
Of the Senate President. But when it comes to actually placement of members in this interparliamentary organization, it's been said that the presiding officers do it, but I don't think that's the practice. What is normally done, and in our own case, was to throw it to the leadership, the entire leadership. You know, we have zonal representation in the body of principal officers comprising of 10 members, and they are solely responsible in determining who from their zones will serve on those bodies. And usually this is done after the selection committee is a special committee, and once the committees are constituted, it is dissolved. And you may want to acquaint yourself with the provisions of our rules, really, where the Senate President, in the case of the Senate, the Speaker is the chairman of the selection committee. So anybody who does work there is still under the chairmanship of the presiding officer. But in actual fact, it's the body of principal officers that determine, based on certain criteria, we look at members who, for instance, disadvantaged in terms of maybe their committee placement. And then we look at skills as well before taking those decisions. So, in actual fact, it's not just the head that does it, but the body of principal officers. And you have raised a very important issue about maybe the chair ruling you out of order or ruling someone out of order. I don't think discretions are supposed to be exercised in violation of the law. Now they say that there are different rules for different situations. And sometimes when the presiding officer has the responsibility of ensuring that there is order in the house, and since we are politicians, a point of order may tend to throw the house, whether it's the Senate or the House of Representatives, into a mood that may not be convenient for the business of the day, really, and it may cause maybe some untoward consequences, and consequences. So if you are presiding officer, for instance, and then such kind of point of orders are raised that you know that it will defeat the essence of that day's business on the floor, it may not be engaging, instead it may be divisive. And then you have the responsibility to look at it politically and assess what you want to achieve in that sitting. Whether you want the peace of the house so that you can transact the businesses of the flow of that day, or you just want to throw the sitting into confusion and arguments and infighting, which may defeat the purpose of that day sitting. So sometimes, jokingly, when a member raises a point of order that is controversial, you may even say, approach the chair. And you tell him, please calm down, keep this one, not for today. You understand? So all these things are done as part of the unwritten rules towards guaranteeing stability and peace of the institution. So if you become Senate President, I believe you would love to exercise such powers. Because I know you very well. If I will overdo it. Ajibola, right?
Clerk of the National Assembly, senators returning, senators elect, members returning and members elect. I am Dr. Honorable Ajibola Moraina. I'm a member elect and also returning from Baraka Central Ibadan Baraka constituency of Oyo State. Mr. Speaker, my take is that we should try as much as possible to grow and develop our democracy. And I think it's a very serious thing for us to do. And we are bound to do it. First and foremost, like you rightly said and observed, representative democracy is limited by law. Indeed, lawlessness is not democracy. Now, the Constitution has ably provided for the twin pillars of separation of powers and checks and balances. And I think this is where we have a duty as a parliament, where we discover that the executive, for instance, is moving out of the law to do certain things. We have a duty, even by virtue of our duty as representatives of the people. Lawmaking, yes. Oversight, yes. But representation. If Parliament says what the President or anybody in the executive is doing is out of the law, Parliament should be able to grow our democracy by ensuring that we approach the court so that the court will interpret and tell us what exactly a man is doing. Not only for the sake of what he's doing right away, but even for the future to come. The question, Mr. Speaker, and my noble colleagues, is why are we shying away over the years from approaching the courts? Indeed, most recently, there was an occasion where the Senate approached the court, and I think 2 or 3 weeks later, the case was withdrawn. We hold this country a duty, we hold this generation a duty, and the coming generations a duty to ensure that we approach courts at the appropriate time for the interpretation, to ensure that executives don't just flag the law and go away with it. Now, secondly, on this issue of motions and resolutions, it also goes to the root of representation. 360 members, 109 senators, they assemble in Parliament, and they are passing resolutions and motions, and they are representing the people, performing their duty of representation, and somebody somewhere is refusing to implement those resolutions and those motions. Mr. Speaker, I think we have a duty to sit down, either to set up a committee or to look into it and see what measures, what strategies can we put in place to ensure that resolutions and motions passed by 109 senators, passed by 360 members of House of Reps, will not just go down like that. There must be means of ensuring that they are complied with, either by persuasion or by going far beyond persuasion, we should look into such measures. Thirdly and finally, I am still in the Green Chambers, but I think the Senate, with all humility, should try as much as possible to widen its scope when it comes to approving appointments. In a situation where they just rely on maybe whatever documents that are available, either from security agents at that time or whatever, may not go well for our country. The Senate or the National Assembly will not be embarrassed in a situation where somebody is embarrassing the institution. So I suggest most of them very much.
Thank you very much. I will come back.
I have two issues that I feel I should bring up for maybe possible for a discussion. Mr. Speaker, the first issue has to do with the issue of nomination, confirmation of nominated candidates by the Senate. I want to believe that naturally the executive will have screened whoever they are sending for confirmation at the Senate. The candidates will have gone through all forms of checks, their backgrounds, qualifications, positions. So my worry really is this: when such names come to the Senate, what are these particular checks that the Senate decides and which makes it absolutely difficult at times for some of those candidates to be screened? My worry really is this: there are gaps within the various government agencies, and those gaps are supposed to be filled by these candidates. It takes also a long time to screen them for reasons which some of us who are newly elected want to verify. We want to know what are these particular checks that the Senate takes so much time to go through, and which times makes it difficult for some of these candidates to screen. We need to know. Because I want to believe, I said the other time, the executive is equally interested in the quality of whoever occupies any position in the government. The Senate is supposed to have to check on the excesses of the just 1 more minute. Sorry, sir. You made reference to the referring to the current president or succeeding president. And if that is the case, it means that they have not become an established norm. And if that is the case, it means that something has to be done. What is this gap? Where is this gap?
Chairman of the session asked question about the independence of the parliament. Oh, sorry. My name is Honorable Munyibe Iden, who came from Rwanda Federal Agency of Acquiring States. My question is about the independence of the parliament. By virtue of the condition that we're operating as a country, we have 3 arms of government: the parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. And I noticed over the time that the other 2 arms of government operate independence, but the parliament, based on my observation, always suffer interference, especially when it comes to election of members of the House. We always have these conflicts. Anytime members of the National Assembly are to be elected, there's always issues of conflict from one arm of government, to this particular one. I want to find out, is there anything we can do as the 9th Assembly so that the Parliament can select its leadership without interference from other arms of government? Is there anything we can do as a policy? Is there any acts we can look at so that subsequent assemblies will not suffer the same thing? Thank you very much.
The session and the Speaker of the Nigerian Federal Assembly, Honorable Clerk of the House, distinguished member-elect, and distinguished Senator-elect, and Honorable Member. My name is Dr. Ibrahim Yahya Omolori. I am elected from Kora Central constituency. Thank you for the opportunity. Because of time, I'll just limit. I have a comment and a last question. Now, my comment is in your speaker's comment of that presentation. You spoke about the representative government being limited by laws. But we do know that laws are made by men. And it's not everything that are codified and written. In many democracies and practices, it is there intent of the law and there are practitioners of the law. Most of the democracies grow by virtue of the practitioners. I think in Nigeria what we need to do is, as practitioners, we are the ones that need to grow. And that's what I've seen as somebody observing from outside. Of course, I've been in Nigeria at the state level. Particularly what we have seen happening in the Nigerian legislature at the federal level. Some of us that are coming from outside have been parliamentarian at the state level of security leader. The intent of the law, yes, there's separation of power. Where you look at development, the separation is not absolute. There is always also cooperation. This brings me to what you said about where you talk about the issue of chairman of National Assembly. You said it's not in any proceeding, in any law. What is it that has been done by the Parliament to correct that? The second question is about the power of presiding officer of the National Assembly. I've had the opportunity of reading the Senate House of Representatives law procedures or the regulations. And I've been a parliamentarian myself, but I've seen and I've watched as a Nigerian how the power of the president are exercised. Does the president have the power to suspend an elected member from his constituency, where that constituency will not be able to have their voice being heard? The last question is, does the Senate especially has the power to refuse consideration of appointment of executive? Because the Constitution has gone through it, says that a secretary or president will submit. You have the power to say we reject or we approve. But do you have the power to retain it now perpetually for all or more than one session without consideration? Thank you.
President. And where the Senate has rejected a particular nominee and the nominee is still kept in office in acting capacity, it seems that the Speaker was expressing a kind of helplessness in that kind of situation. It seems as if the Senate was virtually helpless to do anything about that situation. But as a newly elected member, with no experience whatsoever, unlike Senator Newell, who has so much experience, I want to say that it doesn't appear to me that we can be so helpless, because there will be interactions between that particular rejected nominee and his agency with the Senate. Isn't it possible, therefore, to compel compliance with the decision of the Senate by refusing any form of interaction with the particular individual or the institution that represents? I want to know that, because if you keep a person that has been rejected in place, and the person will come before the Senate or the House of Reps for appropriation, particular committees for the appropriation to the agency, I think you should be able to refuse to have any interaction with such things or with the agency, and thereby compel the executive to obey, or at least to obey the decision of the Senate and ensure total compliance with the clear provisions of the Constitution. Thank you, sir. That's my question.
Okay.
Is how can the National Assembly management ensure good relationship with the executive in order to deliver campaign promises to our people back at home and to be able to deliver the democratic dividends to our people? Because we do understand most of the time when there's friction, the people at the local level or our constituencies suffer the most. So what does National Assembly management does when we have such a problem? Thank you very much.
He talked about, of course, efforts to grow our democracy, and he said that when there's disagreement, particularly between the executive and the legislature, the courts should be approached so that they can have pronouncement on it. Well, I think that is that would be good, but you may want to be very wary of the bills, the cost of litigation. And you know how expensive it is. You are practicing lawyer yourself. If you must hire a senior advocate or team of senior advocates on virtually any issue that comes up, disagreement between the executive and the legislature, the bill will be too much. And you talked about measures that we may take in order to ensure compliance to our resolutions of the House. I think what we have done so far for the benefit of those who are coming in just now, I think is with particular reference to the House of Representatives. I don't know if that committee exists in the Senate. We have a committee known as Committee on Legislative Compliance. And the committee is mandated specifically by our rules to ensure compliance to our resolutions and the whole hearings with government agencies that are the subject matter of those resolutions, to ensure that the resolutions are complied with. But I cannot judge the success rate as of now, but I think in some cases they've been very, very successful. But if there's a need for us to retool that, then the Ninth Assembly, once it is inaugurated, may want to look at it and possibly maybe float some other options that may be concretized in the nature of this legislative compliance that we have in order to ensure that at least our resolutions are complied with by the executive. Senator Jibril raised the issue of confirmation. He was wondering what are the additional checks required in the case where the executive have done all the background checks, even the nominees have been vetted by security agencies. What are the additional checks the Senate requires? I think that the role of the Senate in confirmation really is not based on the fact that the executive has done its work. Because the Senate, in exercising this power, I suppose, is meant to serve as a check in order to ensure that whatever escaped the executive does not escape the Senate. Now, if we are followers of these confirmation processes, especially in the US, you may have noticed how rancorous the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh was in the US. It was like a hail of a war, a battle. And that is what is supposed to be. The Senate is never meant to serve as a rubber stamp, even though they are to work with the executive. They cannot be working for the executive. And because they represent the people, there are information they can pick from the ground that may escape executive scrutiny. And the legislature is supposed to scrutinize all this so that at the end of the day, when the candidate is confirmed, we know that yes, we have a candidate that is clean in all respect to be able to fit into the position that he's been appointed to. But in most cases, as you will have noticed, even the candidate that has been submitted to the Senate, pass all the executive checks, pass all the legislative checks, have turned out to not to have been suitable for appointment in the first place. So you agree with me that we need more checks, as a matter of fact, both at the level of the executive and at the level of the Senate. We require even more checks so that we can hold the executive to account and not just merely rubber stamp the appointees, believing that they will have passed through all the screening. We talked about the most powerful presidents, and he was wondering whether it is just this president or others in Nigeria have been referred to as that. This coinage was made long ago, even before 2015, when the present president was elected. So it's always been said that the Nigeria's president is the most powerful. And in the course of my contribution, I pointed out the reason why that appears to be the case. And I say that it is because of the fact that we as parliamentarians and even the judiciary, we've been unable to stand up to our responsibilities really. When they're talking about a powerful president, they're talking about a weak legislature and a weak judiciary. That is the case in all countries where democracy is struggling. It's the institution of parliament and the judiciary that is weak. And you can check it scientifically, that has been proven. Honorable Idem talked about independence of parliament, especially what can the Ninth Assembly do to ensure that presiding officers are not dictated to from outside. Well, that is our collective responsibility. And in the National Assembly we have a history. It appears that a lot forget about the history, that when leadership is imposed, they have always been repelled. Somehow. Whether it is in the case of the Senate, we knew what happened. I don't want to be specific, I don't want to mention names so that I don't hurt sensibilities. In the House of Representatives too, there was that attempt and it became very fatal. So at the level of the states, it's almost like taken for granted. We have former excellencies here, some of them legislators before they became our ambassador in the executive, some of them, they were in the executive before they now became legislators. In the state, it appears that the institution of the parliament there, the state assemblies have been effectively pocketed by governors. Maybe they were educators, some of how they did it. But in the National Assembly, there has always been this inborn belligerence on the part of the members to see that it is only leaders that they determine themselves that lead. And where those who are imposed from outside have been imposed, the story has never been good. It's never ended well. So I hope we will learn from this history. Senator Ibrahim talked about whether we can correct this appellation chairman of National Assembly. I don't think there's anything wrong to correct. The law is very, very clear. The Constitution is very clear. There's nothing for us to correct there, because the law is clear. We should just cite the law and that solves the problem. The presiding officers have the power to suspend a member. I don't think no presiding officer has ever suspended a member. Not in any of the legislative houses has been a member to. Members are suspended in consequence of House resolution, not so moto by a presiding officer who would just sit and say, I suspend you for this period. It's never done. The Parliament acts only by way of resolution, and there has to be a resolution to that effect. But this is an area we may want to look into deeply, really, because there's precedents, even in the United States, where we borrowed our constitution from. Members have been suspended on grounds of gross misconduct. And but it's something that is evolving, and we need to, there has been judicial pronouncement, left, right, and center. So we need to put them together and weigh the interests of the constituencies. Normally the situation is that if a member is suspended, the constituency recalls that member, knowing that they will not have the benefit of representation for such a period, or they may agree to say, okay, just have the punishment and go. So if we want to take the President of the United States, fine. If we don't want to do that and say, okay, no one can suspend anybody from the National Assembly, then you may want to know that a situation has arisen, I think, in the House of Representatives. Where 2-3 members can really make the House or the Senate ungovernable. They will prevent you from sitting, for instance, for more than 2 weeks. Or even more. All it takes is just to be raising point of order, point of order, point of order. And you can't conduct any legislative business. So if such were the case, what will be the effective response of the institution of the National Assembly? These are things that we may want to consider at the end of the day. One of the Senator Prince Adedayo talk about whether we can design ways of compelling some kind of compliance with the decision of the Senate where they have rejected or denied confirmation to a particular candidate referred to them who has now been appointed in acting capacity. Well, the Senate will have to dig deep into this and see what they can do, maybe raise of a committee like we've done in the House in terms of legislative compliance to deal with that. But it's a subject that can really be taken up in 9th National Assembly. Honorable Victor talked about continuous development of members of the National Assembly. What has the management designed in order to ensure people-focused representation? Well, after I've taken turn to explain some of the things that I will explain, I'll yield the floor to the clerk to the National Assembly, maybe to respond to some of those issues affecting him. And he talked about managing, what can National Assembly do to manage good relationship with the executive. That one too is neither here nor there. There will always constantly be fight between the legislature and the executive. But what leadership dictates is that we should always rise above these issues. Because especially when you are dealing with high stakes distributional issues, it will be contentious even at the level of the parliament itself. And you normally wouldn't have a very robust relationship with someone who has been called upon to exercise checks on you. Those things are there, they will always be there. No matter how friendly we are, we will always have issues between the executive and the legislature. But as leaders, we're supposed to rise above those issues, show leadership, work together, generate consensus. And in most cases, without conflict, you cannot even have consensus. So the fact that consensus is there and democracy is supposed to be driven by consensus means that there will always be conflict. If there's no conflict, there's no need for leadership, no need for even politics. Because politics is the art of resolving conflict. So these conflicts will always be there. You will never have a situation, a perfect situation where you don't have issues with the executive. It will never happen. And that's my response to that. The Honorable Zakaria attempt to amend Section 143. What will the incoming legislators do to ensure that their bills are passed? Well, perhaps introduce less controversial bills. But this Section 143 was very, very controversial. The ruling government then believed that we're targeting the president. And those who believed there was an incoming government say, oh, we wanted to relax the law so that anybody they elect can be easily impeached. But the point is that we were trying to strengthen democracy and to ensure that the checks on account of removing either the president or the vice president on grounds of violation of the provision of the Constitution is made more probable rather than non-existent. As it is, Section 143, I repeat, always can never be successfully activated by any parliament. It will never work by the design of that provision. So when people talk about impeachment, I just laugh. Those of us who are informed know that you cannot successfully activate Section 143. But in the US, it's very real that if a president, for instance, does not maintain fidelity to the law and constitution, he can actually be removed in the US. And that is maybe what made us down, especially the present president of the US. Otherwise, he will have hit the rooftop. Senator Betty talked about automation of our sessions. So of course, that was one of the goals that we set to achieve in our legislative agenda, but unfortunately, paucity of funds. If you notice, the entire building itself needs some kind of intervention. Some of the equipments we have there were installed in 1999, and sometimes they fail. But if we don't have the resources, we cannot successfully automate. That is one of the challenges that we have, and I hope maybe the National Assembly can overcome that and be able to automate our processes and procedures in line with parliaments in developed countries. And when you go to those parliaments, it's a beauty to behold what they are doing. I hope that we can achieve that but we need funding. With the funding, we should be able to do that. But I want to yield the floor now to, I think I've responded to all the issues that I've noted here, so I yield the floor to the clerk to the National Assembly to address aspects of the questions that concerns the management.
Honorable Chairman had actually responded to most of the questions. The only one that was directly to the management was the management setting aside for the continuous assessment of the members. The only way I can respond to say that we do have, especially the NILS, that has a lot of programs that, for training and retraining of members, and also quite a number of ones that come up through collaboration with some of the international organizations. And from time to time, members are invited to take advantage of these programs. And the other question was, how can mass management ensure good relationship with EXCO to deliver democratic dividends? That's a very tough one, and I don't know whether we as management or bureaucrats can come out from our hiding, which is supposed to be. One of the things we're going to find out about us in the months ahead is that we surely know our limitations, we know where our work should stop and where the politics should continue. I think this is more to do with the politicians, and I know that there are effectively a lot of infrastructures in place to be able to get that done. On our own part, what we do always is to prepare ourselves inside, provide all the necessary technical supports that you need to be able to do the work that you have to do. And then once you do that, then we allow you to take over from there in terms of playing the politics of good relationship. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank, first of all, for presentation, and most especially to all the participants, distinguished senators-elect, members-elect, the House of Representatives. We still have a paper to take before lunch, and I believe that we will listen to the next presentation in absolute silence, as we have done, and thereafter, briefly, we will do a mock session of the inauguration of Parliament, and we can adjourn for lunch. So, over to the facilitator.